right, welcome to the Young Turks. Cenk, Uygur, and Kasparian with you guys. So tonight, interesting show. Obviously, we'll have a lot of updates from Gaza and the situation in Israel. We'll have Republican reactions. We'll have George Santos with a baby yelling about terrorists. Unions, which way are they going? Tons of conversations to be had and stories to do. And then at the 8 o'clock hour, when we normally go to a bonus episode, we'll have Vivek Ramaswamy join us for a special interview tonight on the Young Turks. Anna and I will do that interview together. So that's at 8 o'clock Eastern, don't miss that. So without further ado, let's get started.
Well, we begin with some devastating updates on Gaza and just the absolute brutal conditions that civilians are dealing with and the ever climbing death toll as a result of the brutal conditions. So without further ado, let's get into the details.
Gaza is experiencing a dire humanitarian crisis with clean water, food, and fuel running out. Hospitals are being pushed to the breaking point. Hundreds of thousands are hoping to flee to Egypt, but only those with a foreign passport will be able to leave if the border crossing opens.
The crisis in Gaza has worsened to dangerous and deadly levels as Israel has ordered the evacuation of more than 1 million Palestinian civilians from the south before they begin their ground invasion, which is expected to be brutal to say the least. Now, Israel has cut off the Gaza population's access to electricity, to food, to water, prompting warnings of a dire humanitarian crisis. In over a week of bombardment, Israeli airstrikes have killed at least 2,670 people in Gaza, including hundreds of children, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. Casualties in the besieged strip over the past 8 days have now surpassed the number of those killed during the 51-day Gaza-Israel conflict in 2014. In fact, here's more on that evacuation order and how those following it are often attacked by airstrikes.
Thousands of flyers raining down from the sky, urging the people of Gaza City to evacuate within 24 hours, a deadline that has come and gone. This is a very densely populated area we're talking about here. This entire area, shaded in red, you see in front of your screen there, home to more than 1 million people, all of them told to make their way south. A mass migration the UN has called impossible to achieve because the residents of Gaza have nowhere to go and are getting no assistance. We have seen Palestinian men, women, and children urgently trying to make their way out. Families packed onto that flatbed truck, others fleeing on foot or on carts pulled by horses. Tonight, the Palestinian Health Authority says at least 70 people, most of them women and children who were obeying those orders to get out, have been killed. 3 caravans hit by Israeli missiles as they fled south.
Everybody from Gaza is moving towards where we are. 1 million people, no food, no water. Where are we going to put them? But my thought is, all these people in the hospital cannot be evacuated. Where's humanity? Where's people's hearts in the world?
In addition to that, Amnesty International has put out its own information about what they're seeing in Palestine, in Gaza specifically in regard to Palestinian civilians and the brutality they are suffering. Our research team found that a convoy, including a truck carrying around 30 people, 8 cars, and other nearby people, including women, children, and people with disabilities, was attacked. Ambulances that arrived at the scene were hit in a second attack and rescuers injured. At least 70 died, and that's just one example. So they're being told to evacuate, and in the process of evacuating, which is an impossible task to say the least, we're talking about more than 1 million Palestinians who do not even have the infrastructure or the ability to evacuate half of Gaza within 24 hours. But even those who follow the order are being hit with airstrikes, which really leads me to question what the real goal here is. Because if there is a consensus, an agreement that Hamas, which is the main target, has gone underground in their extensive tunnels, who are the airstrikes really harming here? It's the Palestinian civilians who are trying to flee to safety. So I have a lot more detail to get into, Cenk, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, along those lines, Anna, why would Hamas keep the hostages in the non-populated area that Israel says they're going into? Why wouldn't they move them into a different area Whether, by the way, it's outside the country, somehow they sneak them out, I have no idea. Move them to the south, etc. Why would they just say, oh, you guys are invading to the northern section. We will keep all the hostages there for you just in case. So what's the point here? So look, I've always been in favor of ground forces instead of random bombings, let alone the non-random bombings. And so what do I mean by the non-random bombings? Don't tell me you're not doing war crimes if you hit an ambulance with your second strike. The ambulance is not unclear. We know what an ambulance is. Everybody knows what an ambulance is. Okay, so you hit the people that you told to flee while they're fleeing. Maybe that's an accident. And I know a lot of people would immediately say, well, since one side is angels and the other side is all devils, and that's probably likely, even though we're all humans. So the angels would never, ever hit a civilian convoy on purpose. Okay, how about the ambulance? No, that's a war crime, and that seems pretty on purpose. And so, okay, I mean, what Hamas did is brutal. Watch what we do. That where you kill more civilians, which has already happened, more children, which has already happened. So where's the moral high ground?
There is no moral high ground. There is no moral high ground. You targeting civilians, there's no moral high ground. There was no moral high ground for Hamas when it targeted Israeli civilians. There is no moral high ground for the IDF as it bombs the hell out of entire neighborhoods in Gaza, leveling them and absolutely destroying and murdering innocent civilians who have done nothing wrong. And then you hear this argument by some Israeli officials that, well, I mean, look, back in 2006, the Palestinians voted in Hamas. Well, more than half of the population, that was 18 years ago, more than half of the population is under the age of 18. Collective punishment is a war crime, and that is currently what is happening. That is currently what is taking place right now. I have no issue with the Israeli government and the IDF going after Hamas, especially after what they did to innocent Israeli civilians. But brutalizing and killing innocent Palestinian civilians is not okay, and that is currently what is happening right now. Yeah. You can't argue that, we're warning the civilians. We're telling them to evacuate. We're giving them 24 hours to evacuate. And then in the process of doing so, you do the airstrikes that kill these innocent Palestinian civilians who are fleeing for safety.
We try to be as productive as humanly possible on the show. When we do critique, we try to give you what they should do instead. And so for my purposes, that's why I keep saying ground troops, if I was them, I would have gone after the hostages right away. And you say, well, that endangers the ground troops. I know, that's kind of the point of troops, right? So I wouldn't have dropped bombs on civilian buildings for what reason? Now, if you go in with your ground troops and it turns out that that Hamas does this thing that Israeli propaganda always says and never actually proves, just hiding behind the children, right? And as you're trying to kill Hamas, the children are being used as human shields or other human civilians, etc. Okay, and they happen to die in that context. I understand, right? I hate it, but I understand. But one, they've never proven that. I have seen IDF soldiers using Palestinian children as guides. I saw a video of it, clear as day. I've never seen it in regards. If you're saying, well, they're hiding among the civilians of all of the 2.2 million Palestinians, so we're just gonna kill indiscriminately. That's not really Hamas hiding behind the civilians. That's you saying, I don't give a damn about the civilians. When you cut off water for everyone, I don't know if you know this, human beings need water to survive. And it doesn't take long for people to start getting desperate without water, especially for their kids.
Aren't they concerned about the hostages?
Yeah.
Yeah, because when you cut off water, fuel, supplies, humanitarian aid in Gaza, and you do so with the idea that you're trying to apply pressure to Hamas to release the hostages. The hostages are in Gaza, in the very area that is being bombed and brutalized as we speak right now.
Yeah, and listen, guys, I know emotions are wrong. What happened to Israel was terrible, and our hearts go out to them. But if you are in the camp of saying, I don't care if they cut off the water and electricity, you're saying all those babies that are on incubators, they're all gonna die. everybody who's on life support in Gaza in hospitals, they're all gonna die, and you're okay with that. That's, look, I have to be honest with you. Even if you're an ally, a friend, a supporter of the show, that's barbaric. If Hamas said, I don't care if grandmothers on life support die in Israel, I don't care if Israeli babies in incubators die, like I would love to cut off their electricity. I would call them barbaric and disgusting. Do not do likewise. It's not, you say, oh, it's too much to ask. No, it's not too much to ask. To not do likewise is Hamas. That's the bare minimum to ask. And Hamas cannot control all of Israel, but Israel controls all of the Gaza territories. And guys, look, these words get super emotional and touchy. I know I lived it more than anybody. I believed in Turkish propaganda. And so for a long time when I was growing up, I refused to call it the Armenian genocide. You know why I call it the Armenian genocide now? Because genocide has certain definitions and it has certain pillars. One is killing innocent civilians, targeting them based on who they are, not based on what they did. So a group attacks you, that's what they did. Collective punishment is who they are, right? Another pillar of genocide is mass relocation.
That's exactly right, and that's what's happening right now as we speak. So
that's what happened to the Armenians.
That's exactly right.
And that's why it's a genocide.
That's why as I watch the footage of what's happening, as I watch the absolute merciless nature of the attacks towards civilians in the Gaza Strip, how could you not call it ethnic cleansing or a genocide, honestly? So I wanna give you more details because the situation, the lack of resources has gotten so bad that they have run out of body bags in Gaza in order to basically deal with all the dead bodies. The lack of fuel has all sorts of disastrous consequences, not only for the hospitals, but also for, the bulldozers that they need in order to get through the rubble and get to, the bodies underneath the rubble. Bodies are piling up in literal ice cream trucks as a result of what's going on. They have run out of medicine, painkillers. Obviously, the hospitals that are located in the part of the Gaza Strip that the Israeli government is demanding be evacuated, they can't do that. You're talking about people who have, severe illnesses, disabilities. They can't just get up and leave and evacuate to the other half of the Gaza Strip. Dr. Mohammed Abu Magesheb, who's with Doctors Without Borders, said the following: 2 hours we searched for drinkable water. Even drinkable water is not available anymore. There is food, no electricity, no pumping of normal water as well. The hospitals are barely working. They are bombing all day. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow and where we are going. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Sunday that Israel has restored water to southern Gaza, where many Gazans have been told to flee. However, the director of the water authority there has said that they did not know if water was available because guess what? You need, electricity in order to pump water for use, and that had not been restored yet. Aid has been piling up on the Egyptian side of the Rafah crossing, the only entry point into Gaza that Israel does not control. But so far, the crossing appears non-functional. Egypt says that airstrikes on the Gaza side have made roads inoperable, and Jordan has said it is seeking assurance that aid convoys will not be targeted by Israeli warplanes. Now, Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived in Tel Aviv this morning, and there are some conflicting reports because he argues that he is working with the Israeli government along with some of the neighboring countries in order to create corridors to get humanitarian aid to Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. He said Rafah will be open, Blinken told reporters during a stop in Egypt on Sunday. We're putting in place with the United Nations, with Egypt, with Israel, with others, the mechanism by which to get the assistance in and to get it to the people who need it. However, this is really important. There are conflicting reports coming from Egypt. Egypt had been allowing some aid to pass into Gaza through the Rafah crossing, but stopped those shipments since Tuesday following Israeli airstrikes on the Gaza side of the junction. Of course, there is no one in the Israeli government entertaining the idea of Palestinian refugees coming into Israel. Of course not, that could never happen. But keep in mind, Israel is a relatively wealthy country, especially compared to Egypt, which is expected to take on the burden of Palestinian refugees, even as the entry point into Egypt continues to get airstriked. It's just incredibly frustrating to see the lack of humanity. Now, I want to go to one more video because this war has the possibility of spreading to neighboring countries as well. In fact, journalists have already died as a result of this war. I want to give you the details after we take a look at this video.
The US is working to contain this war, but it's already spreading to the West Bank, where more than 40 Palestinians have been killed in violent clashes. And in Lebanon, where the deputy chief of Hezbollah, a militant group that supports Hamas, said it would act when the time is right. An Israeli strike in Lebanon near the border with Israel today hit a group of foreign journalists, killing a Reuters videographer and injuring 6 others. As the situation in Gaza deteriorates, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appeared before cameras today to say this is only the beginning. That Israel is striking at its enemies with unprecedented might and will eradicate Hamas.
And the Pentagon is concerned that this is going to spread to countries like Iran and Lebanon. That's part of the reason why the Biden administration has sent some carriers, 2 different carriers, to the region in order to deter Iran from getting involved. Let's go to graphic 9 here. Further escalation of the long-running conflict increasingly risks spilling over regionally, prompting the Pentagon to order a second carrier strike group and squadrons of fighter jets to the region as a deterrence to Iran and Iranian proxies such as Hezbollah in Lebanon. So I am worried that this is going to expand and it's going to turn into, honestly, a world war. Because some of the Israeli airstrikes have actually hit Syria. As you saw in that video, some of them have hit Lebanon. You have all these accusations in regard to Iran supporting Hamas, and it could spread to a war with Iran as well, although the Biden administration is attempting to prevent that from happening by sending those carriers and other aid. So Cenk, what do you think about all of that? Do you think that this is going to calm down in any way, or is this just going to expand?
So I'm super worried about it expanding. And if I was the Prime Minister of Israel, again, just to be constructive, what I would tell my military is, hey, you got a Hezbollah group firing rockets at us. Make sure you take them out, obviously, right? But be super careful because we don't want the war to spread. There's no way Hamas is going to beat us trapped in Gaza. There's a 0% chance of that. But if we drag Lebanon in and we drag Syria in, and then God forbid we drag Iran into the war, that's the only scenario under which Israel is actually under significant danger. I don't mean local danger, I don't mean danger of terrorism. We know that that exists. But I mean existential danger. So why is Netanyahu constantly going around and poking every bear? So I'm not against the strikes against Hezbollah and Lebanon, I get it. But they preemptively destroyed the tarmac in the main terminal in Syria. Maybe they have intelligence that the Syrians were going to launch strikes from there. But if the Syrians launch strikes against Israel, Israel would have every right to retaliate, and it would. So I don't know that Syria was ever going to do that. That would be significantly surprising. But now Israel has officially attacked Syria. Now Syria has a right to self-defense, and for all everybody saying Israel's got a right to self-defense, I hate the Syrian government. I hate Bashar al-Assad. We've gotten into very fiery debates with other people online about it. I think they're butchers in a lot of ways. But why now you guys are the ones saying self-defense allows for everything. So now the Bashar al-Assad and Syrians have the right to self-defense on anything? No, of course not. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But why are you constantly agitating for a bigger war? It's madness. And Netanyahu has been trying to get Iran into a war for the last decade at least. And he begged Trump, get out of that peace deal. I don't want peace. I don't want peace with Iran. Netanyahu said 1,000 times. Why are you trying to endanger Israel, let alone the whole world? What is wrong with this monster? Both Hamas and the right-wing government of Israel constantly say war, 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 kill, kill, kill. Enough, God damn it. Protect your own civilians, let alone everyone else. What are you endangering Israel for, you lunatic? How would a war with Israel, with Iran, help Israel? How? On what planet does it help Israel? It helps Netanyahu. Oh, I'm a wartime prime minister. I'm the only one who could protect you by starting larger and larger wars. Look at how stupid I was, where I didn't do any intelligence and let them butcher you. What happened, Netanyahu? I thought you were a tough guy who was supposed to protect Israel. Now the Israeli citizens know, 86% in a poll said Netanyahu should have done his job and gotten intelligence. But instead, oh, look at this, more violence, more war, more bloodshed. Netanyahu thinks that helps him politically. He's a disgusting person. You don't see what Hamas did and how disgusting they were, and then say, oh yeah, I'll outdo them and I'll get into Israel into even bigger trouble. The problem isn't the innocent Israeli citizens or the innocent Palestinian citizens. The problem is the leadership, warmongers on all sides.
We're not done with this topic quite yet. When we come back from the break, Jake Tapper has a shocking and unexpected redemption arc when it comes to this very issue. So when we come back, we'll show you several examples of him asking some real tough questions in regard to Israel's response to what Hamas did and the treatment of civilians in the Gaza Strip. More of that when we come back. Don't miss it.
All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys. Vivek Ramaswamy is going to join us later in the program, obviously Republican presidential candidate. New members are John P., Joe Gukin, and Storm Herald 13. We appreciate you guys. And Laurel Dragon and Moon Dragon both gifted 5 Young Turks memberships on YouTube. You guys make the show possible. If you see us saying things and reporting the news honestly and fairly, that's because of you. And we appreciate you, members. All right, Anna.
Well, Jake Tapper, of all people, has been involved in a bit of a redemption arc, especially when it comes to the topic of the Israel-Gaza war. And I did not expect this. So let me give you a little taste and I'll explain more.
The Israelis are bombing the crap out of Gaza, Jake. I mean, it doesn't seem like saving the hostages are a priority at all right now.
Israel's utter bombardment of Gaza with constant airstrikes is so extreme that even Jake Tapper seems pretty appalled by it. While speaking with Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, on the State of the Union, Tapper expressed befuddlement over why the United States seemed to sit on the sidelines as American hostages remain trapped in Gaza, an area that has been absolutely blockaded and cut off from humanitarian aid, fuel, water. Obviously, they're dealing with like a crazy amount of airstrikes. The civilian death toll continues to increase. So Tapper asked Sullivan about it. Let's see what he had to say.
What's the conversation like in the White House about the US conducting any sort of operations in order to save Americans being held hostage in Gaza?
Well, the president has been very clear that he has no higher priority than getting Americans back safe, Americans who are being held hostage by Hamas.
The Israelis are bombing the crap out of Gaza, Jake. I mean, it doesn't seem like saving the hostages are a priority at all right now.
Well, for President Biden, they are a priority. They're the highest possible priority, and he has sent hostage experts to coordinate and consult with the Israeli government on hostage recovery efforts. We do not at this point have pinpoint location information for where the American hostages are. So we have to continue to refine our understanding of where they are and even, Jake, who they are, because we know there are 15 unaccounted for Americans, but we cannot confirm the precise number of American hostages being held by Hamas at this time.
But don't worry, everyone, because our White House is currently consulting with the Israeli government, which of course is signing off on the airstrikes that happen to level entire neighborhoods in the Gaza Strip, areas where some of those hostages might actually be. But that was just one of the interviews, Cenk, that Jake Tapper actually challenged some of the narratives coming out of the Israeli government and honestly corporate media here in the United States. What are your thoughts on what Sullivan said and how he answered those questions?
So first of all, credit to Jake Tapper. So put aside everything in the past, credit where credit is due. It's good to see someone on cable news covering this fairly and asking the right questions. God bless on all fronts there. So we'll get to more of that interview. And I just want to say for now, I always try to put myself in the position of the other person, right? So if I had a family member that was taken hostage, what would I want done? The very last thing I would want done is bombs dropped onto buildings. What if my family member's in the building? What if they're in a tunnel that you're dropping a bomb under? You have no idea. Why are you dropping bombs? No, look, we're gonna lose a lot of folks here, and it's a heartbreaking situation. So troops have to go in, and they're also human beings, right? And there's gonna be terrible fighting in the streets, I get it. But if I had a family member, I want those troops in immediately trying to find the hostages. Dropping bombs from the sky, A, is never gonna find the hostages, B, clearly endangers them. And if I had a family member, I wouldn't want the water and electricity cut off. Well, then what the hell's gonna happen to my family member who's a hostage in one of those tunnels? You gotta get in there, I understand that. But this is, what they've done so far is 0% helpful.
Now, what was interesting was how Jake Tapper framed one of the questions he asked Sullivan. So he did this comparison of the Palestinian civilians to the very civilians in Ukraine who are currently dealing with brutal conditions, obviously an ongoing war thanks to the invasion of Vladimir Putin and Russia into Ukraine. So let's take a look at how Sullivan handled that framing and whether or not he did a good job in answering this question. Let's watch.
Take a listen to what Secretary Blinken said last year when Putin was targeting Ukrainian infrastructure.
Heat, water, electricity for children, for the elderly, for the sick. These are President Putin's new targets. He's hitting them hard. This brutalization of Ukraine's people is barbaric.
Now look, Israel is not Russia. Gaza is not Ukraine. It's a different situation. But cutting off supplies, cutting off heat, cutting off water to civilians, what's the difference?
Well, first, thank you for saying that Israel is not Russia, because Israel is not Russia.
But
second,
civilians are civilians,
before,
Jake.
we are in
Civilians are civilians.
contact. Yes, absolutely they are, and they deserve, as I said before, access to water and medicine and food. And we are working actively to ensure that that happens.
No, you're not.
Right, so we'll get to Sullivan in a second. I just have to say, and I don't mean to give such glowing reviews on Jake Tapper, but I have to in this context because it's just so rare to see someone in legacy media ask these difficult questions about the behavior and actions of the Israeli government and the IDF. It is incredible to see it.
Look, I've criticized Jake Tapper dozens of times and pretty harshly at times. But as I was watching that, I was thinking, go Jake, go. Someone on cable news saying Palestinians are human, civilians are civilians. Why do we have a massively contradictory policy when it comes to Russia and Israel? When Russia cuts off the water and electricity, they're barbaric. When Israel does it, rah, rah, rah. Jake Sullivan saying, oh, we're trying to prevent that. No, you've given no indication of that at all. And this is what you're supposed to do as a journalist. Challenge the powerful and hold them to account. Thank you, Jake Tapper.
Now I want to skip ahead to another interview that Jake Tapper had. So he has this conversation with Jake Sullivan. Later he has a conversation with Gilad Erdan, who is the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations. Now during that interview, Jake Tapper basically relayed a message from the Biden administration to the ambassador. And here's how that went down. Let's watch.
President Biden and the Biden administration are urging Israel to hold off on any ground incursion until there has been a humanitarian corridor established so the innocent Palestinians in Gaza can escape.
I don't know of any pressure coming from the Biden administration to hold our operation. We said that we will use every means at our disposal to eradicate Hamas's terror capabilities, and we meant it. The Prime Minister gave an early warning few days ago already, and sadly, it's very sad because I really feel sorry for the suffering of the people of Gaza. But we should all remember they elected Hamas 18 years ago.
Just want to remind you all that Hamas was elected 18 years ago. There haven't been elections ever since then. There's essentially a dictatorship by Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and about half the population under the age of 18. So the majority of the population did not vote for Hamas, but they are now dealing with collective punishment by the Israeli government in retaliation for the brutal killings and kidnappings that Hamas had carried out against civilians. Now, if you find it deeply immoral and disgusting that Hamas targeted civilians in Israel, and I absolutely do, you should have the same feelings in regard to civilians in the Gaza Strip. And it appears that Jake Tapper does, because he follows up that answer with a pretty hard-hitting question, which we'll get to in just a second. Cenk, thoughts on that?
Yeah, just real quick on that one. That do not use the argument that Hamas voted, the Palestinians voted for Hamas. Other than the fact that Anna gave you, which is already huge. The second part of that is that's exactly what Hamas says to justify killing Israeli civilians. Well, they voted for Netanyahu. They voted for these governments that continue to occupy us. So their civilians are just as guilty. That is totally wrong, abhorrent, immoral. But when we say, oh, Hamas can't say that, but we'll say it about the Palestinians, you destroy any moral high ground, credibility, etc. And you feed into the Hamas ideology that it's okay to kill civilians because of how they voted. And remember, of course, not everyone voted that way in Palestine or in Israel or in America when we did atrocities.
Now, Tapper went on to challenge Gilad Erdan. Let's take a look.
If Hamas is a terrorist group, which it is, but if it is, then how can you hold all 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza responsible for what Hamas did? Don't you think that they rule by killing people who oppose them? I mean, how seriously can you hold? How seriously can you expect the Palestinian people, half of whom are kids, by the way, how seriously can you expect them to rise up if they are brutal murderers, which they are?
We do not expect them to rebel. We cannot decide for themselves how to live their life, but we are fighting for our life. We just lost 1,300 Israelis who were slaughtered and butchered and massacred. And like any other normal country, we have to ensure that such atrocities will not happen again.
So it is absolutely true that what Hamas did was wrong. They committed war crimes. About 13 to 1,400 Israeli civilians died as a result. But currently, the retaliation that's been carried out by the Israeli government against the Palestinians, they say Hamas, but take a look at the death toll. At this point, over 2,670 Palestinian civilians gone, dead. Women, children, innocent civilians. So again, if there are moral issues with the targeting and killing of Israeli civilians, then you can't have a double standard when it comes to civilians of a different, cultural background or religion.
Yeah, let me see if I can clarify the absurdity of this logic. So remember there was a couple of synagogues that were hit in America, one in Pittsburgh and one in Southern California. And the people who did the killings there, you could certainly argue are terrorists. They targeted them because they were Jewish and they had these crazy conspiracy theories. Now they happen to be awful right-wingers in those particular cases. And by the way, there's Nazi compounds in Idaho, for example. There was Nazis in Charlottesville chanting the Jews will not replace us. If a foreign country, Israel, et cetera, said, well, I mean, you've got terrorists killing Jews inside America, that's true. And then hence they dropped a bomb in Pittsburgh, we'd be like, what, are you insane? What are you doing? No, you can't, just because there's some terrorists that hit a synagogue in Pittsburgh, which we all despise that they did that, and we're, et cetera. That doesn't mean you could hit Pittsburgh. There's a Nazi compound in Idaho. You can't just drop bombs in the middle of Idaho going, well, maybe we'll kill some civilians, but we'll also kill some Nazis. Like when you make that analogy to here, everybody goes, well, of course you can't kill our civilians. But when it's Palestinians, all of a sudden everybody's, not everybody, but a lot of people are like, no, maybe you killed our civilians. Maybe that's their problem. Maybe they shouldn't have elected Hamas. Maybe they should leave Gaza, which is, they literally can't. It's an open air prison. That's the whole point of the occupation, is they don't control their borders and they can't leave. They're trapped in there. It's an open air prison. I can't believe how well Jake Tapper did in correcting some of those myths. Great job by Tapper.
Well, he continued this streak today. He was interviewing a former Israeli ambassador to the UK named Mark Regev. And I haven't seen this yet, it just broke, but I am curious to see how he handled it. Let's take a look.
Certainly taking out Hamas's leadership, I understand the point of that, but the Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza says 2,800 Palestinians have been killed, and somewhere between a quarter and a third of them are children. That's not Hamas's leadership.
Can I please offer a word of caution? Now, I know that there is real suffering in Gaza. There's a war going on, and innocent people are getting caught up in a very difficult situation. I don't minimize that. But you have to take with a grain of salt any information that comes out of the Hamas-controlled Ministry of Health in Gaza.
Right, so we should just all ignore what we can see with our own two eyes. The leveling of entire neighborhoods, the 24-hour evacuation order impacting 1.1 million Palestinians. We should just ignore that because it's all made up by Hamas, right?
So as I look at that city, it reminds me of Istanbul where I grew up and until I was 8. And my parents have an apartment there. And I think, imagine you've got parents who live there or kids who live there, and you see bomb after bomb on top of building after building. How would you not be a nervous wreck that your parents or your kids are in those buildings? I mean, this is the oldest adage in the world: 2 wrongs don't make a right. An eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. So we're not, guys. This isn't an anti-Israel thing. Israel was very hurt. Their civilians were massacred. I get their anger, their sadness, and their rage.
And we felt that anger and sadness and rage. I felt that anger and sadness and rage. But I also feel anger, sadness, and rage when I see Palestinian civilians get killed and brutalized the way that they are as we speak right now, when they are victims of collective punishment that they do not deserve. And what is the point of international war crimes? What's the point? What's the point? No one really cares. Let's keep it real, okay? Because the United States will continue supporting whatever the Israeli government wants to do, okay? There's no question about it. It's unequivocal. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen made absolutely clear that we will continue funding and aiding the Israeli government as this war continues. No conditions, no strings attached. Doesn't matter how many Palestinian civilians die as a result of what military operation the government thinks they're engaging in right now.
And so far, it has been nothing but counterproductive. 0 hostages recovered, 2,800 innocent civilians killed, which then forces everybody to say those poor 1,400 that died in Israel, but now twice as many poor Palestinians killed inside Gaza. So you had the world's sympathy. There was a moment where someone could have been magnanimous. And I was talking to a Jewish friend over the weekend, and I said, look, I know it's impossible. And it's probably too much to ask for. But imagine if Israel had, in that moment of incredible grief, said, we're going to be better than this. And we're not going to do likewise. We're going to go and try to get Hamas, and a lot of our troops will be killed doing that. And we're going to go and try to get those hostages because we need to return them. But we're not going to drop bombs, and we're not going to kill civilians like they did. And we're going to I know they can't say the end occupation right after Hamas attacks. I understand that, of course. You don't want to encourage wrongdoing by Hamas, right? But if at a later time they were to say we're going to end the occupation no matter what happens, it would give such great, there's too much anti-Semitism in the world, guys. We need to cleanse that anti-Semitism out of the system. And if Israel were magnanimous at a moment when they had no business being magnanimous, no one expected it of them, it would have been amazing. It would have been amazing. And there's still time. There's still time. But unfortunately, Netanyahu and this right-wing government is not inclined in that direction. Instead, they're inclined in the direction of giving away all sympathy, starting a larger, broader war, attacking civilians as well. Just going, we accidentally hit the bus, and we accidentally hit the ambulance that came to rescue people from the bus, and we accidentally dropped bombs on top of residential buildings. No one believes that. I know some people in their rage and anger and sadness say, I believe it. It was all an accident. They didn't mean to kill civilians. But I got news for you. The rest of the planet does not believe that. So this bloodletting doesn't help anyone on any side. Hamas started it, no question in this case. But we cannot have it on either side. We must protect civilians, no matter what their race, ethnicity, or nationality is.
We got to take a break. When we come back, a terrible hate crime, according to authorities here in the United States, that led to the death of a 6-year-old boy. That and more coming up.
Back on the Young Turks, Cenk and Anna with you. More news.
Well, unfortunately, the war in Israel and Gaza has spread. At least the hateful actions and behavior have spread to other parts of the world, including here in the United States. There was an alleged hate crime that we should talk about. Let's get into the details.
An Illinois man is being charged with a hate crime after stabbing this 6-year-old boy 26 times, killing him. His mother was also stabbed multiple times, but is expected to survive. The suspect, Joseph Zuba, was the family's landlord. He now faces a first-degree murder charge and 2 hate crime counts. Police say he targeted them because they were Muslim.
That's right, a 71-year-old man named Joseph Zuba in Illinois has been charged with 2 counts of a hate crime after stabbing a 6-year-old Palestinian American child to death. The boy's mother was also attacked but survived the stabbing and is recovering in the hospital but is in critical condition. Now, Zuba was apparently their landlord, and it's interesting because there are some reports indicating that he actually had a great relationship with them prior to what Hamas did in Israel. The suspect allegedly even built a treehouse for the 6-year-old. The 71-year-old landlord built the boy a treehouse, let him use a swimming pool, and bought him toys, the child's relatives said. But over the past few weeks, according to the family, something changed and he had grown hostile to his Arab tenants. Now, a week after Hamas's attack, things apparently changed between the landlord, or in terms of the landlord's thinking, that is what is being reported, although the story is still developing and the details might change. So I would definitely urge you all to wait as we learn more details about it. Now, here's what the Washington Post claims. Zuba allegedly knocked on the Palestinian family's door just after 11 a.m. When the mother, Hanan Shaheen, answered, he assaulted her with a serrated military-style knife while yelling anti-Muslim statements, forcing her to run to the bathroom to call 911. In Arabic language text messages to the boy's father right after the attack, the family said, she wrote that Zuba had knocked on the door. When she answered, she texted, he choked her and then tried to stab her while yelling words to the effect of, "You Muslims must die." And then when she emerged from the bathroom after calling police, she found Zuba attacking her 6-year-old son, Waideya Al-Fayumi, who later died of his wounds. He had been stabbed 26 times, the Will County Sheriff's Office said in a statement. Shaheen, 32, was stabbed at least a dozen times and remains hospitalized in serious condition. So he's been charged with first-degree murder, attempted murder, and aggravated battery, and he also has 2 counts related to hate crimes. In a statement to the press, the Will County Sheriff's Office said the following: detectives were able to determine that both victims in this brutal attack were targeted by the suspect due to them being Muslims and the ongoing Middle East conflict involving Hamas and the Israelis. Cenk.
Yeah. So the father of the victim couldn't believe that this guy who had been so nice to the family before had killed his son, that he wondered if the son had gone to hug him and the guy accidentally stabbed him. As it turns out, no. What did he stab the kid 32 times, I think?
He stabbed the 6-year-old 26 times.
26 times. And the mom 12 times, I think. Okay, so guys, the human mind is very open to influence, both fortunately and unfortunately. And there are some people in this country who are not mentally well. And there's tons of people who are not mentally well, but they've got minor issues, or they have mid-sized or even major issues, but they're not prone to violence. But there is a subset that is prone to violence. And people keep going around triggering them. So what did Donald Trump say after the attacks? Hamas is here. You have to protect yourself. They're in America. You gotta do something. Well, when you have a mentally unstable person like this, because if you're wondering, why did he switch overnight? Because all of a sudden he started hearing messages in media saying that the Hamas is here and that they're the awful, terrible people that you gotta do something about. And that it's people who are mentally well don't do stuff like this, right? But there is a giant number of people in a country of 330 million people that are unfortunately prone to violence and are not mentally well. We all in media and politics have to be careful not to trigger them. Does the right wing and Donald Trump look like they're being careful? No, they're doing the exact opposite. Why don't you do something? Come on, these Palestinians deserve it. They all voted for Hamas, etc. And then you get a lunatic to go and kill a 6-year-old boy and stab him 26 times. You think he got the idea out of nowhere? It just popped into his head? No.
So look, the reason why I say we should wait to learn more details about this, because the story is still developing, is because there's a contradiction in the story as it's been reported so far. You have family members of the boy and the mother who were targeted by this guy saying, well, he was so polite and so friendly before, what happened? But then there are other members of the community who allege that the suspect here, Zuba, had serious issues. As news of the arrest spread, people who live nearby said in community forums on Facebook that he had long alarmed residents with yard signs telegraphing his extreme views. One woman wrote that she had alerted local officials about the unhinged man. Now, the Palestinian tenants had seen the signs but did not understand their symbolism and had not experienced the landlord's extremist side until recently, said Yosef Hanan, an uncle and family spokesman who was sitting with the slain child's father during a phone interview. So there could have been just the inability to understand his extremist side, being able to understand what crazy extremist signs that he had posted. However, I don't know what those signs said. There are no details about that in the reporting yet. But as the story develops, and if the details are compelling to share, I will definitely share them with you. But the idea that a 6-year-old boy is a threat to anyone's safety, the idea that you need to stab a 6-year-old boy 26 times and kill him, it's just depraved, immoral, disgusting behavior. And luckily we haven't seen any type of violent targeting of Jewish Americans, but there has been harassment of Jewish Americans as well. So the idea that what's happening with this Israeli Gaza war should somehow compel anyone in any other country to carry out acts of violence against innocent people, I just don't understand it. I don't understand it.
Well, we're not supposed to understand it because they're not mentally well. Nobody who's healthy and normal does this kind of barbaric act, right? But that's why I keep saying you've got to be careful about what you say. So, for example, I've criticized the occupation of the Palestinian people dozens of times on this show. And what do I tell you almost every time? Remember, it's not all Israelis, it's the right-wing government of Israel. Our government also does wrong things we don't agree with. This is not about Israeli civilians, et cetera, et cetera. We say that almost every time when we criticize another government. The Russian people are perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with the Russian people. It is their government that has invaded Ukraine and done these terrible things. It's the Saudis. It is not their people that did it. It is their dictators that are taking these terrible actions, et cetera. But do you see other people being that responsible and careful? I mean, in my lifetime, come on, guys. Even if you're a right winger, be honest. How much have Muslims been, demagogued against and in this country and fear driven about them and terrible, terrible things said about Muslims 2,000 times over in this country. That's why when I usually, even lovely, good people that are right wingers, when I encounter them and I tell them at some point my background was Muslim and I used to be Muslim, they go, oh, that's a shame. Because this nonstop influence of Muslims are terrible, and that's why Hamas, what they did. What a terrible, awful set of human beings, because you didn't just condemn Palestinians to getting slaughtered there. You didn't just kill poor innocent Israelis. You condemned all Muslims to this goddamn stereotype that's an albatross around our neck. And so then you have lunatics like this that then get triggered by right wingers going, oh, you gotta attack all Muslims. All Muslims are that way. I did a 3-hour debate with Sam Harris because the guy pretended to be an atheist. And then all of a sudden he says, but no, only Islam is the worst religion. That's why Bill Maher, sometimes I agree with him now. But it's so hard to overcome his demagoguing against Muslims for his entire career. The Muslims are bad, the Muslims are bad, the Palestinians are terrorists. How many times have they said it? Later in this show, we're gonna show you Republican after Republican, heartless pricks going and telling everybody how terrible Palestinians and Muslims are en masse. And then you have people, what happened after 9/11? They killed Muslims, they killed Sikhs who aren't even Muslim because they were wearing turbans. It has happened how many times now? And every time the right wing who stoked that anger and hatred then pretend to be surprised. Oh, golly gee, did they murder innocent 6-year-old Muslim boy? I don't know, I was just the one telling them the Muslims are all evil 24/7. I guess somebody did something. Yeah, you know what it leads to. And they don't mind because they're agents of hatred and fear and they divide us nonstop and try to tear us apart. All human beings are the same. Please, if you're out there, please get that crap out of your head about how Jews are different or Muslims are different or any religion or nationality is different. We're all humans. That's so obvious. How could these monsters not see it? Go ahead, speak out against every different religion from all these different sections. All you're gonna do is drive more hatred and more killings. We're all humans. Anyone who doesn't realize that is a moron of the highest order. How stupid do you have to be to not realize we're all the same? We're all obviously the same. Stop murdering each other for no reason.
All right, we got to take a break. When we come back for the second hour of the show, we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about how Trump supporters feel about his handling of labor-related issues in comparison to Joe Biden. Come right back.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur, and I'll see you soon.